Hello everyone, today me and Luca will be presenting to you chapter 3 of Lord of the Flies, also known as Huts on the Beach. Now I know we're on screen right now, we're not live in the flesh, so we don't have the same effect on you guys. It's going to be hard a bit to concentrate and stuff, but we're going to try to be as engaging and as enthusiastic as possible, so please just bear with us. Alright, so before we get into it, I'd like to give you guys a quick overview of what we'll be talking about in this presentation. First things first, I want to give you guys a chapter summary just to refresh your memory because I know we did it before the break, so it's probably still a bit rusty. Afterwards, I'll give the mic to Luca where he'll be going through the route of Jack's success as a hunter and Ralph's growing ineffectiveness as a leader. He will also be making links with these two characters and communism and democracy. The mic will then return to me where I will be touching on the different viewpoints of each of these characters, the link with the civilization, and finally I will also touch on the political standpoints that these two have. So now that you're ready, let's get into it. A really important chapter. It starts off with Jack being alone in the forest, stalking a pig, and striving for that first kill. Golding does a really good job of explaining how Jack feels in this environment, how a spark between him and madness occurs. He's rather unsuccessful with the hunt, as we all know. And then he goes back to the beach and finds Ralph and Simon working on huts. Ralph is frustrated at the poor state of the shelters. He blames this on the other kids who are not helping but enjoying themselves. Simon believes Ralph should call a meeting, but Ralph says they talk and plan, but then everyone ends up wandering off anyway, which is true. When Ralph adds hunting to his complaints, that's when Jack really becomes annoyed. The two disagree about what the priority should be. And when Ralph notes that most of the hunters come back and were swimming, Jack defends himself. But then Ralph gives him the bomb. He tells him that he hasn't gotten any meat yet, and that's when the anger between them really rises. Ralph then goes on to imply that Jack is not contributing and explains why they need shelters. Besides the possibility of rain, the little ones are having nightmares and screaming. Simon mentions the beast, but neither Jack or Ralph want to talk about that. Jack admits to sensing something when he's alone in the forest, that urge that we were talking about earlier. The boys start talking about the fire and rescue, but then Jack brings up how he craves that first kill. The chapter ends off with Simon going off into the forest. After getting through for the little ones, he goes off on his own, and he sits down in this new place that he's discovered. And there we have it. That's chapter 3.
Shortly after the plane crash, we are introduced to our main characters. Although there are many, there is a clear rivalry between two of them that lasts from the very beginning of the novel all the way to the end. This is between Jack and Ralph. After the finding of the conch and the results of the vote, this clearly brought out a lot of jealousy in Jack, as he had not found the conch and he had not won the votes, even if he wanted to be leader. It was Ralph. As Ralph was using the conch to bring the kids together and Piggy's voice to convince the kids, they had won their trust almost instantly, and it wasn't difficult for Ralph to win the election. Ralph was set to create a sort of community between the kids that would mimic something they had seen when a more mature, older adult was around them. Ralph's first idea is to be rescued. His only plan is to be rescued. He wants to build shelter. The first plan of this, in his head, was to make a big fire. He had set to this, and Jack, although Jack did not want to follow along with this plan, he obeyed Ralph's order because he had the conch and decided to continue building the fire to try to be rescued. Although Jack complies with Ralph's command in making the fire, it is obvious he does not agree with Ralph's idea, and he would rather make himself at home on the island instead of trying to be rescued. It is almost as if he has accepted he would be stuck on the island and he would not be able to be rescued. So his plan is to make himself as comfortable as possible for the duration of his stay on the island. Reviewing these characters in depth, it is easy to conclude connections between them and two of the most powerful styles of government in the world. These are communism and democracy. It is quite obvious that Jack represents communism and Ralph represents democracy. At that point, Ralph had been on top, and the kids had followed a democratic approach by using a vote system to see who would be leader. Jack also has a more democratic style of leadership, as he appoints jobs to each of the kids in function of what they can and cannot do to make them the most effective to be rescued off the island. He cherishes the opinions and the lives of the kids on the island and not himself. Ever since Jack had seen that first pig in the forest, it was becoming increasingly difficult for Ralph to have control over Jack. Jack would no longer listen to instructions by Ralph, and he had also grouped up some of the kids to take hunting with him in his pathetic attempts to catch the pig. Ralph was beginning to get more and more concerned when they started painting their faces, as most of the other boys were afraid and were younger, they didn't understand the deeper meaning of this painted faces. Ralph knew that savagery was starting to creep into them and the fear had started to take over. They were no longer thinking of what they were doing, and the democratic approach to most problems were slowly starting to dissipate. In light of this, instead of arguing with Jack, Ralph decided to go with it and to let him hunt, as the kids wanted meat and he wanted the best for the other kids. Jack had gotten what he wanted. He gathered a small group of boys to help him hunt the pig, and he wasn't capable of catching by himself. He used face paint as a means of intimidation, and this is further proven when he sticks his weapon into the log and gives an intimidating stare. His group of hunters were rapidly increasing, causing more and more issues for Ralph and his plan for the fire and the rescue. This is further proven when the boat had passed by and Ralph and his group or Jack and his group were out hunting instead of keeping the fire going. This is the first time the kids could have been rescued, and because of a stupid decision, they weren't. The relationship during World War II between the Soviet Union and the United States was quite rocky, similar to Jack and Ralph's. The United States has sent much help to the Soviet Union during the invasion of Nazi Germany, similar to Ralph's, allowing a growing number of kids to join Jack in his pathetic attempt to catch the kids. Ralph decided to allow the kids to go help Jack hunt, to give the kids meat instead of building a fire and building shelter, in the hopes that the kids would be in a better mood and have what they wanted.
Hey, we're back. Alright, so now we can talk about the viewpoints and roles of Jack and Ralph in this chapter specifically. So, the main focus of this short chapter is to develop conflict between Jack and Ralph. The two engage in a verbal argument that indicates that each character is clinging dogmatically to his own perspective, and that makes sense because they're kids. What is more is they represent opposing ideologies. While Ralph is dedicated to building shelters for the group, Jack is determined to becoming a successful hunter and establish himself as a lone hero among the group. Ralph's orientation is towards the group, while Jack is concerned with his own glory, which hinges on militaristic values. Jack seems to dominate and conquer nature through hunting and killing pigs, a goal that foreshadows the intensification of his violent impulses throughout the novel, and further identifies him as a symbol for communism and not democracy. And we're going to get into that in just a bit. Golding also elaborates on Ralph's character in this chapter, which is presented as sympathetic, rational, and focused on the group's welfare. Still, he's not the perfect leader. He expresses regret and frustration that he cannot control the behavior of the other boys. The major burden that Ralph faces is that he must deal with young children unprepared to care for themselves or fulfill responsibility. As he explains, Ralph cannot simply give them orders and expect them to be completed, as Jack automatically assumes he can. Ralph alerts the reader to one of the major obstacles that the boys must overcome. They must behave beyond their years in order to survive and flourish long enough to be saved. While a dialogue in Chapter 3 highlights the ideological contrast between Jack and Ralph on a structural level, Golding also forces Jack and Simon into comparison, and although it's not clear, I want to touch on it. The chapter begins and concludes in the forest, linking both characters to the area. In contrast to Ralph, who's associated with the beach and the mountain, where he marks with symbols of civilization like the fire and the shelter, Jack and Simon are both anti-civilizing characters, attracted to the wild, which they prefer to experience in solitude and silence. Nevertheless, their experiences of the forest are markedly distinct. While Jack disrupts and disturbs his surroundings, causing both birds and pigs to flee, Simon feels in complete harmony with it. He submerges himself in the rhythms of the forest, not to disturb it, but to appreciate its unique sounds, scents, and images. Jack and Simon thus represent two different human approaches to the natural world: the desire to subjugate nature and the desire to coexist in harmony with it. Alright, so finally we'll be looking at Jack's communist side and Ralph's democratic side. Jack's communist side can be seen quite often in the novel. In theory, communism works, right? However, due to human greed, it does not. Oftentimes, communism ends up becoming a militaristic ideology, which is what we talked about Jack in one of the previous slides. Firstly, Jack promised all the people on the island that they will receive a lot of meat and have lots of fun and whatnot if they join his newly found tribe. But little did they know, Jack already manipulated them into joining his tribe merely so he can rule as he sees fit. This is similar to communist Russia because Joseph Stalin manipulated the communist system and became the new ruler of Russia. One way Stalin did this is by completely removing his partners. And in the book, Ralph can be considered as Jack's partner, no? And despite this, Jack purposely manipulated certain events so that the majority of the people on the island could follow him. Furthermore, Jack attempted to completely get rid of Ralph later on in the novel, similar to how Stalin had his communist partners completely assassinated. And there we go. That's why Jack is a communist, and even maybe shifting toward a totalitarian. I don't even know how to say that word. Finally, we can quickly see that Ralph is a democratic leader, not just by contrasting him with Jack, but also because he starts off by conducting a vote and then gets elected as a leader to go on and set rules, conduct meetings, and it even establishes law and order. He also thinks of the well-being of the group and protects them from harm until violence and fear take hold and the communist leader takes power. To summarize, in their argument, Jack and Ralph both have completely different perspectives on how things should be operating on the island. They prioritize very different things. Ralph is focused on short-term survival and being saved, while Jack is focused on long-term survival and how they need meat. These priorities are the basis of their disagreement and what sparks their political divide. For Ralph, enforcing rules and order is ideal, but for Jack, hunting and playing in the wilderness is ideal. For both characters, the absence of adults and lack of civilization has significant effects on their behaviors and how they think. Without realizing it, Jack adapts his lifestyle and begins having wild urges, slowly losing his humanity and diving towards madness. This explains why he is greatly fixated on the long-term survival side of the spectrum. On the other hand, without being conscious of it either, Ralph misses the civilized life and the presence of a dominant figure, so he rebels against savageness. And this is what leads him to prioritize short-term survival and building huts/fires. I will now pass the mic back to Luca.
After Jack had started his own tribe, the influence Ralph had on the rest of the kids was almost obsolete. And almost all of the kids decided to join Jack on his hunters group to go catch the pig and the beast. All the kids except Sam and Eric, Piggy, and Simon decided to join Jack, and they kept staying strong with their leader of Ralph. Ralph tries to sustain the fire on their own, but they soon fail, as there's not enough people to get enough material to burn to keep the fire going. In order to try to regain some respect among the kids, Ralph decides to join Jack and his group of hunters in their attempt to catch the pig and catch the beast. After almost catching a pig, Ralph rants about to the other kids, hoping they would once again look at him with this admiration they had once done the first time he blew the conch, but this soon backfires on him. At this time in the story, Jack and Ralph's relationship had been quite rocky, and it is quite rocky. This leads us to wonder why he would allow Ralph to join his hunt for the pig and the beast. After the hunt is over, Jack uses this opportunity to embarrass Ralph, but he still doesn't explain why he let Ralph join his group of hunters to hunt the beast and the pig in the first place. After Ralph was ranting about how he almost killed a pig, Jack wanted to take the attention off of him. In order to do this, he questioned Ralph's every move in order to convince the kids that what Ralph had done was wrong and that he could have done better. When Ralph was about to plead his case, Jack started a circle where they reenact the killing of the pig. One of the kids almost got killed, and this is the one who was playing the pig. They had been too realistic, and they were poking him with the spears. The rivalry between the two can be compared to another rivalry. This is between the Communist Soviet Union and the Democratic United States. Although this had happened after the book had been written, I found many similarities between this rivalry and the rivalry between Jack and Ralph in the book. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first successful artificial satellite, the Sputnik 1. Because of this success by the Soviet Union, the American population was becoming increasingly nervous that they had been surpassed in technology and development. After the launch of the Sputnik, they launched the Sputnik 2 and the Sputnik 3. The Americans felt pressure to regain the respect among the people. They planned the first manned vessel to space, but ultimately it was the Soviets who were the first to put a man in space. In my opinion, the rivalry between the two countries is similar to the rivalry between Jack and Ralph. After Jack's success, which is similar to the Soviet success, Ralph felt similar pressure that the Americans felt to regain the respect among their people. Ultimately, it was the Soviets who had the first man in space. Jack and Ralph's rivalry was apparent since the very beginning of the novel, and is very similar to the ongoing and very long-lasting argument between the United States and Russia. That is, pretending a certain president was not in power. Trump. Throughout the novel, it is apparent Ralph represented a democratic leader. As he was voted into power, he made Sunday meetings and wanted to establish order in the kids. He wanted their well-being over anything. Jack, on the other hand, represented a communist leader. He wanted total power over everything and did not care about the other kids and just wanted power. Although Jack was becoming more and more successful as a hunter, but wasn't a very good leader, but the kids still followed him, Ralph was less and less effective as a leader, and he no longer had any control over the kids. This was finally established when he blew the conch and nothing happened. None of the kids respected the blowing of the conch, and it no longer that was the point where democracy had went out the window, and it was no longer important. In my opinion, I think William Golding got big inspiration from this rivalry between Russia and the United States, as the novel was written in 1953, and the argument and the rivalry between the United States and Russia was very apparent during that time. He made the novel to portray how two groups, a communist group and a democratic group, would interact together. Throughout the novel, the rivalry between Jack and Ralph was very apparent and also more and more fierce, from the finding of the conch to when they were finally rescued. Jack and Ralph quite obviously represent two of the largest and most powerful types of government, these being communism and democracy. Although the kids favored the democratic approach Ralph offered in the beginning of the story, they slowly had a change of mind, something that will hopefully never happen in North America.